Was Lewis Hamilton's fourth place finish at Imola the start of his Ferrari resurgence? Were all the crashes this past weekend all because drivers are under more pressure than ever? And is Max Verstappen actually human? This is On Track, talkSPORT's motorsport show, available on talkSPORT 2 every Tuesday from 2 p.m. and throughout the rest of the week on the talkSPORT podcast network as well, and on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel, which is something you should subscribe to. Hit the little bell and you'll get notifications every time we upload a new video. Loads to talk about this week. We're here in Japan, having just covered the Formula E. We've got the Formula 1, which happened at Emilia Romagna. Piers, former British F3 driver, and F2 and F3 and Porsche Carrera Cup commentator.
Porsche Mobil 1 Super Cup.
There we go. This past weekend at Imola. How did your weekend go commentating some pretty good racing in the junior categories?
Yeah, it was great. Great to be back at F1 HQ doing F3 and Porsche Super Cup. It was my Porsche Mobil 1 Super Cup debut back in doing the next round of F3. Very much enjoyed it. And I got to see a lot of the inside sort of production of the Formula 1 race as well from sort of on the ground. So yeah, no, good weekend.
Amazing insight. And I always like it when they're on the TV, they kind of take us behind the scenes and we get to see cool stuff. One of my favourite things actually in an F1 weekend is when Martin Brundle sort of ventures off to a random corner and then they just come to him live, because it's like you don't see him there, you see him in the pit lane, or you hear him, you don't see him out on the track. And for some reason I'm fascinated with that. Anyway, Imola, a track that is, you know, a favourite for a lot of drivers, the first of two races in Italy on the calendar. What do you make of that track? I'm sure you've driven it many times, at least on a sim.
No, I've not driven there in real life, unfortunately. Would very much like to do that, but no, it's proper old school circuit. Still retains a lot of the same corners from when it was first made. As you know, there's been some chicanes added here and there just to keep speeds safe, but it still retains a lot of that authentic feel. It's bumpy, it's narrow, it's technical. The drivers have to use a fair few of the curbs, and curbs are a bit of a talking point as they caused some issues for some drivers this weekend that I'm sure we'll get onto. But especially when I've driven it on the sim, really enjoyed it.
Well, look, that's actually where we're going to start, because it feels like this weekend, and I'll be honest, you know, I've been here in Japan, there's a time difference. I've been doing Formula E, and also, by the way, if you want to check out some of the stuff that happened this weekend in Formula E, we've got a very special highlight show, which is available on the talkSPORT podcast network, and there's also a behind-the-scenes look at loads of stuff here in the paddock in Tokyo on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel. I've been over here just watching from afar, and it just feels like every time I open my phone, I was just watching another massive crash, whether it was in Formula 1 or in the Indy 500 qualifying, you know, huge smashes. In Indy 500, I mean, Colton Herta, Scott McLaughlin had some pretty big moments there. And also at Imola, then, there's two big talking points when it comes to accidents. And I think we have to start with Yuki Tsunoda, don't we? Because that was a pretty scary one.
That was massive. That was a really, really big crash. And he was lucky to walk away fairly unharmed, shaken, not stirred. But it's just testament to the safety standards of the circuits these days and the cars. But you know, watching that, it was really spectacular. Spectacular in the sense that it was, you know, crazy to watch. Not that we want to see crashes like that, because, you know, who knows, if things had gone differently, we could have seen things turn out worse, either for Yuki or the people around, because there was people in the stands behind. But, you know, it just really shows you the speed of the Formula One cars on circuit, because we sometimes get accustomed to how quickly they go around the track, but as soon as they leave the normal camera shots, you really see actually how much ground they cover in such a short space of time, and how much energy is involved in these Formula One cars. And when it goes wrong, it can be quite scary. But ultimately, it was born out of the fact that Yuki just pushed a bit too hard and took a bit too much curb, just as I was speaking about a moment ago.
It feels like, and we'll kind of delve into these two things a little bit more now, with Franco Colapinto being the other big accident, which was a kind of similar thing where he kind of went on the grass and he just lost control. They're both drivers that are under pressure in different ways. Obviously, Colapinto was back in Formula One, first race for Alpine after the kind of very high-profile driver switch while everything else goes on at Alpine. And Yuki Tsunoda has been brought in to replace Liam Lawson, and he's being asked to try and compete with Max Verstappen, which no one can compete with Max Verstappen. Do you think any of this is down to them feeling the pressure and having to kind of push that little bit harder, which is when mistakes happen?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. When a driver feels under pressure and is forced to push slightly further out their comfort zone than they would normally be, then that's when small mistakes happen. And in Formula One, a small mistake can turn into a big consequence, as we saw for both Colapinto and for Tsunoda. We've already touched on the Tsunoda incident. It was into the Villeneuve chicane in the second section of corners on the Imola circuit. Often the drivers in the first left-hander, they take a little bit of curb, but he thought he could just nick a little bit of extra lap time by taking a bit more. But these cars, they're so sensitive to aero load and at such high speed. He took too much curb. When the car landed, it then jumped sideways. The aerodynamics didn't work. And then he was on a one-way ticket to a big crash that was worrying for a few moments until we saw Yuki get out of the car. But also, it ultimately hampered his weekend. He did well to get points in the end, finished in 10th place. I'm sure we'll go through the results at some point. So it was a good recovery, but he shouldn't be happy to finish 10th place in a car that is the same as the car that won the race. So that's bad. Onto Franco Colapinto. You mentioned
let me
he's
just
under pressure.
Stop you on Yuki Tsunoda. I was just going to say, if you've not seen it yet, obviously it's all over Formula One's social media, but it reminded me a bit of the Zhou Guanyu incident at Silverstone, in that the car hit the fencing and, there are spectators just behind there. And as you say, you see the kind of energy that's involved and how quickly a car can hit a barrier, but also go over the barrier. And it was also a bit like Jack Doohan, where he didn't close the DRS. And you just see how quickly, if everything isn't perfect on those cars that rely on, the downforce and not taking a bit too much curb, how quickly things can go wrong. And that was, a very scary incident, but also another reason why the halo, it seems mad now to think that the halo wasn't a thing as many as, just a handful of years ago. Sorry, please go on with Franco Colapinto, because that was another big incident that I think the TV cameras kind of missed at the start, and then we kind of saw the full extent of what happened.
I think, I'll touch on that you mentioned a moment ago. Small mistake for Jack Doohan and Suzuka on practice, which saw him have that ginormous crash at turn number 1. Small mistake, just didn't close the DRS. We mentioned it already with Yuki Tsunoda. Small mistake, probably took a foot, like 6 inches, 12 inches, what's that, 30 centimetres further left than he had done at any point in the weekend, which when you've got a 2.5 metre wide or 2 metre wide Formula One car, that's not much, but that's the margin between a good section of corners and a gigantic crash that effectively changed the course of his weekend. He actually was quite lucky with the way that the race fell to end up getting in the points. I don't know whether if it was a safety car free race, whether he would have done as well as he did. He didn't have the pace of Verstappen in any practice session or qualifying, and I don't think he did either in the race. But then Franco Colapinto, we were talking about that just a moment ago. He is under pressure. Everyone's looking at him because he's just replaced Jack Doohan, and some people were thinking, yep, Jack needs replacing. Let's see how Franco can do in the Alpine this time. We saw him out last year in the Williams, of course. He was quick, but also had a few crashes, so he needs to potentially avoid too many more crashes. Otherwise, that reputation might stick. But he's under pressure because he needs to come in and perform straight out of the blocks. We've heard these rumours that he's got 5 races to prove himself. Whether that's just lip service to the media or whether he is in for a 5-race test, I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard of someone being tested in a race season. I think it's a convenient way to get him in the seat. And then once, possession is 9/10 of the law, they say. I think he's probably, as long as he doesn't do terribly, he's going to be in that seat for the rest of the year, unfortunately for Jack Doohan. But yeah, he's under pressure. He needed to perform. He wanted to stake his claim. And when his teammate Pierre Gasly is performing alongside him, he wanted to get as close to him as he could. Couldn't quite match Gasly in practice, and then was trying to find a couple of extra tenths, potentially at a part of the circuit where there isn't much more time to gain. Just dropped a wheel over the back of the curb for the second apex, the right-hander of Tamburello in the first sector. And once you're on the grass, we saw it with Tsunoda. Small mistake, just slightly wide or slightly off your normal racing line, and a quick trip to the barrier ended his session, and a lot of work for the team.
Yeah, the thing you forget, and actually the more you're around pit lanes and paddocks, and obviously if you go to motor races yourself, the more you see how much work actually goes into it. You see the cars get delivered back on the back of a sort of flatbed truck, and you see the mechanics kind of assessing the damage to see how much they're going to have to get on with. And actually in the Indy 500 qualifying, I was kind of seeing what they were doing with the cars there. To think that they got some of these cars back out on the track to go and actually qualify for the Indy 500 was ridiculous. And it's the same in Formula One as well. Like, these cars are such, incredibly expensive machines, but also intricate machines. And one thing breaks, then something else breaks, and it's kind of like a chain reaction. So shout out to everyone that's had to repair cars. I think that for Franco Colapinto, going back to the Alpine thing, I don't believe a lot that comes out there at the moment, because I don't even think they know who's in charge, do they? Because Briatore is kind of assuming the role of the team principal, but I'm not sure he's entirely allowed to be the team principal. Do you know any more about that?
I don't know the ins and the outs. In theory, he's said that he's potentially been banned from being team principal, but I don't think there's actually any regulation to say that you can be banned for life. I think that was something they said when he left the sport. I think he's managed to get around it because, what is he, an executive consultant? Is that the word they've been using? Executive director or something like that. So he's probably a contractor or consultant, but then he's assuming the role of team principal while Oliver Oak steps aside for reasons I don't know either I want to get into on a published broadcast, because there's a lot going on behind the scenes with his team Hitech in the background, which may or may not have contributed to his resignation. I don't know.
Well, he was back in the paddock, wasn't he, with Hitech, which was, I think, surprised a lot of people. And while we're on Hitech, and just to take you away from having to say any more about that situation, which I know you don't want to talk about, it was good to see that Luke Browning in the Hitech car was on the podium again in F2. And also we saw another former GB3 driver win the F2 feature race as well, and Alex Dunn. That was pretty impressive, wasn't it?
Yeah, so Hitech, despite all of the rumours of stuff going on behind the scenes, there was talk that they may not even be on the grids. I'm glad that they were, because the people that stand to lose out if things go badly behind the scenes are the drivers and the employees of the team, so that the mechanics and engineers. And the fact that they were there at all was great news, and they rewarded themselves with some good results. Dino Beganovic took pole position in Formula 2. Then Browning and Beganovic had a good race in the feature race especially, and managed to get some podiums. And then Alex Dunn, a former driver of Hitech, managed to take the win as well. He's driving for Rodin actually in F2, but he's a former Hitech driver as well. And Hitech did all right in the Formula 3 races as well. So it's good to see them, and good to see that it hasn't affected the racing as yet, but we'll follow that as things go on, and maybe in future podcasts we'll be able to say a bit more.
Yeah, I think ignoring the noise is the term you would give it for everyone at Hitech at the moment, just getting on and doing really well, as Hitech have done for many, many years now. Let's talk about the win then. Max Verstappen. I mean, it's all about the turn one pass, because he somehow managed to turn nearly being passed by George Russell, who got a great start, into going around the outside and just taking the race lead and making it look effortless.
It was Max Verstappen all the way this weekend. Granted, the Red Bull team did a good job to put him in a position and give him a car that he could perform with, but he was the one that nearly took pole position. I think he absolutely extracted everything from that Red Bull, as we've seen him do so many times this year. I think the McLarens on race pace still have a fairly decent advantage, and we'll come on to the race. But in qualifying, Max is still able to extract it and just get so close. I think it was 300ths, wasn't he, away from pole position, which is how we watched I've watched the Ghost lap. He was right there or thereabouts, and it was just the last corner that pretty much sealed it for Oscar Piastri. But turn one, you mentioned it already, not a great launch off the line, actually, as you mentioned, third place going down towards turn one, alongside with George Russell he had on his inside, and it seemed as if Oscar had got the lead sealed. But then genuinely, one of the best moves I think I've seen in a long time. I've watched racing and been part of it for 15, getting on to 20 years. Very few overtakes I see where I go, wow, that was actually a very, very impressive. Because normally overtakes fairly regulation. You've seen them before. I commentated on almost all of the support races over the weekend at Imola. Just F2 I didn't, but I watched those races as well. I didn't see a move like that around the outside from so far back from any other support category all weekend. And he did it on the first lap, and it was outstanding. It was amazing. I don't know how he did it. I think it helped that Piastri braked a little early, but it was all Max.
On the commentary, they said that they didn't think that Max Verstappen probably knew he was going to do that until he was already doing it. Do you think it is instinct that made him pull off that move? Because you just wouldn't imagine that would have happened. Because it looked like that. I just can't even put it to words, really. It was just ridiculous.
He was like a whole car length behind Oscar Piastri going into the braking zone. And yes, Piastri potentially thought he had the turn sealed, so braked a little earlier than he potentially could have. But if you watch the heli shot, you see how far ahead he was behind Russell going into the braking zone. And by the time he was going into the second apex of Tamburello, he was about 5 car lengths ahead of Russell. So that's the amount of ground he gained around the outside. And you mentioned it, it is just pure racing instinct to see that Oscar Piastri's braked early, to notice there's a potential opportunity to hold the brakes into the corner, not run wide, balance of risk as well. Can I make it through without getting run into or making it over the gravel? It was just amazing, and that was what won him the race. Really, that incredible move down into turn 1, because he could control the race from there. Yes, of course, I think throughout the race things fell in his way with the 2 safety cars, and that helped him out. But if he wasn't in the lead, he wouldn't have been able to control the race that way. And we're really seeing some of the best performances in Formula One history and motorsport history from Max at the moment. And I'm starting to consider the whole Red Bull second seat situation slightly differently at the moment. I'm maybe even changing my opinion a little bit.
Please elaborate. I mean,
yes.
Are you saying that basically no one can come close?
We've spoken about it on this show a number of times, because I know that the second Red Bull seat has been a talking point for 6 months at least, ever since last year when Checo Perez was signed for this year, and then he was performing terribly, and then there was the Liam Lawson for the first 2 rounds, and Tsunoda's been put in. And the consistent thing is no one's been able to get anywhere near Max Verstappen in qualifying all the races. When was the last time we've seen 2 Red Bulls on the podium? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it hasn't been for a while. And in qualifying, Max is up in the top 3 or 4 positions consistently, and the second Red Bull struggles to make it out of Q1, let alone Q2. And we've discussed, is it the second driver that's underperforming a lot? And maybe we need to change the driver, and that's why there's been so much change in the second seat at Red Bull. But I'm starting to consider that the consistent thing is Max Verstappen's got about 3 or 4 tenths on his teammates and consistently outperforms them by 10 or 20 seconds in the race. At what point do we have to start thinking maybe it isn't the second driver that's the issue? Maybe Max is just that good. Maybe he is just 3 tenths better than everyone. Maybe it's scary to think that is the case. Like in Formula One, all these drivers have won in every category they've been to. They are 20 of the best racing drivers in the world, proven by their junior category, and they've got experience in Formula One. Maybe Max is just head and shoulders above everyone else. And I've maybe been in denial this long, but it's hard to argue against when you look at his consistency, his performances, his overtaking. I don't know if we've seen a level like this before.
I appreciate that you are big enough and man enough to admit that you might have been wrong the whole time, but I can't disagree with you. It is ridiculous for him to just turn up and do what he does. He had a baby the other week and he missed, preparation. He was not on the ground for as long as he needed to be. He got in that car, drove really well. He's done this. He probably knew that he needed to be ahead in that race and he would have to overtake as quickly as possible. And he then pulled off this crazy instinctive move. What are we going to see next from Max Verstappen? He probably still won't win the championship this year. It does look like the McLarens are still very, very strong. I mean, let's not talk about it anymore, because I don't want to have to come on here and go, okay, I was even more wrong when he comes and wins the championship and shows up all the McLarens, because I've now said that the McLarens are stronger. Let's talk about the McLarens. Obviously, they came second and third, 6 seconds behind Lando Norris was, behind Max Verstappen. Why was it that the McLarens couldn't, challenge Max Verstappen and maybe overtake, get the lead later in the race?
I think Max and the McLarens had fairly similar race pace yesterday. Therefore, track position was really important. We saw that that they couldn't really. There wasn't really much going on in terms of gapping or closing in the grand scheme of things. But because Max had track position, he had better opportunities. He managed his tyres well as well. Let's not belittle him. That he was managing that tyre in the first stint, particularly went a bit longer than a lot of the other drivers, which then put him in a position to make the most of the safety car periods. We had a virtual safety car, and then the full safety car later on in the race for the two broken down cars on the exit of Tosa in separate incidents. But yeah, it's just one of those things. I think Piastri was a little unlucky to lose out to Norris. I think he arguably performed a bit better, but then the way that the pit stops fell and who pitted when, it favoured Norris. And granted, they had a good battle. If I'm honest, it was good to see them going wheel to wheel. We haven't seen them go wheel to wheel properly that many times. Great move from Lando around the outside of turn 1. Oscar tried to deter him, but very, very close to contact. But that was good watching. But then Norris didn't have the pace to chase down Max at the end. I think second and third, probably about right, actually, when you're looking at the performance that Max drove. And then Hamilton in fourth. That was a little bit of a surprise, especially, coming off the back of qualifying where neither of the Ferraris made it through to the top 10.
We touched on George Russell a little while ago. I enjoyed watching the battle between him and Lando Norris. Always good to see those two fighting it out. It was kind of early on in the race and it wasn't for too long, but like watching like Alonso and Hamilton out on track. I kind of like watching the people who have kind of raced before together. George Russell, incredibly consistent again. And as we say, he got the best start in the race, but only finished down in seventh. Why was that?
Yeah, great qualifying for George, putting it third place in a car that arguably shouldn't really be in third place in qualifying. And we've spoken about it a few times. So I say we, mostly me, but I'm very impressed with George's form at the moment. He hasn't finished. He hasn't finished outside the top 5 this year. He hasn't finished outside the top 7 since since Qatar last year. This 7th place this weekend was his worst race since Italy, Monza last year. So he's in a very, very good run of form. The Mercedes this weekend just wasn't good enough on the long run pace. And that was compounded by the fact that the pit stops didn't exactly help him with the virtual safety cars and the safety cars. When they came out, it didn't suit his strategy. So down in 7th place, but he's performing at a really, really high level. And I think it was just that the Mercedes, they seem very, very circuit dependent, don't they? Some weekends they're absolutely rapid in the race. Other weekends they just don't have it. And equally confusing, you mentioned the Ferraris, I think briefly just then, horrific in qualifying. Both Ferraris knocked out, started 11th and 12th, and then actually had a really strong race. So bit of a strange one at the moment with how the ebbing and flowing of performance goes from weekend to weekend, but even day to day. This is it makes good watching, but it's probably quite stressful for the people that work for the teams.
I would imagine so. This was a big weekend for Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, he's had all these different, I guess, sort of moments on the Ferrari timeline. The first one was the unveiling, then the first time he's in the car, then the first race. The first race in Italy is another huge timeline moment. And to qualify 12th and go out in Q2 along with his teammate, so, it doesn't look so bad. But then to finish 4th, what did he do right this past weekend?
I think Ferrari just genuinely played the strategy really well, and that hasn't been a strength of theirs in years gone by. Part of it this weekend was luck with the placement of those two interruptions for a virtual safety car and then a safety car. But also they were on the right tyre at the right time, and then Hamilton had to perform. He overtook when he needed to. He was decisive with his moves. Even listening to his post-race interview, he was actually excited and happy and enthused by the result. We've often seen a deflated Hamilton this year, which is hard to watch. But this weekend, he said it was great to be driving through the field, making overtakes. Great to see the energy from him. And it was just one of those where they actually maximised the situation they had. They definitely had a better racing car on Sunday than they did at qualifying on Saturday, which potentially made things a bit more stark in the contrast and why I think people might think they overperformed on Sunday, but it was good. It was a good result. 4th place for Hamilton. Leclerc was 6th, but ultimately was there or thereabouts. He was in the same fight as Hamilton towards the end of the race, split by Albon in the Williams, which is another standout result for him as well.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Alex Albon. It's been a long time since he's had a podium. I don't think he's actually had a podium for Williams, has he? I think his last podium was maybe Red Bull.
Alex Albon's never had a podium in Formula One.
Has he not? I swear he's had a podium.
I don't think
there
he
we
has.
Go. I feel like he might have had one for Red Bull. I think it's been a long... Anyway, look, he was very close to getting a podium for Williams, which would have been a huge deal. And, with Carlos Sainz finishing, down in 8th, Williams are really coming to the party this year. Do you think they will get a podium by the end of the year? It feels like all they need is, a bit of a clash between two cars ahead of them when they're around about 5th or 6th, and they could be on for one.
I think you're right. I think... You're hearing Albon's post-race interview as well. He was in the same boat. He said that he was a bit optimistic with the move around the outside of Charles Leclerc, which saw him go through the gravel, which ultimately left him losing that position to Hamilton. So he by rights thought he should have been 4th on the road. And he said, if I'd have got into 4th, I was going to go after and start chasing Oscar Piastri. I mean, who'd have put bets on Albon chasing down Piastri in a Williams versus a McLaren, maybe a second half or the middle of last year? That would have been unthinkable in a dry race with no mitigating circumstances. Granted, again, Albon had the tyre advantage at that late stage in the race, but Williams were the ones that put him in that position. So they're operationally behind the scenes doing good stuff. And Albon and Sainz performing to a high level. Sainz was unlucky again, one of the drivers that fell foul of the timing of the safety cars. But still, 2 solid point score finishes, 5th place for Albon, 8th for Sainz, arguably potentially could have been 4th and 7th or 4th and 6th had things fallen differently. Probably the 3rd fastest car this weekend, I think, in race pace, and genuinely touch and go with the Ferraris. But that's amazing, and they've done such a good job. And it's great to see Albon enthused as well, because it's been a hard few years for Williams, and clearly what James Vowles is doing is working to at least to some extent. And I hope that it continues throughout the rest of the year. And then who knows what happens in 2026.
Be good to get a podium at the British Grand Prix. I'm just going to put it out there that we can go back and we can watch this when Alex or Carlos gets on the podium at the British Grand Prix. Alex Albon, thanks to some live Googling, has 2 podiums in Formula 1, 2020, the one-off Tuscan Grand Prix, and also the Bahrain Grand Prix, 3rd, both of those, and that was for Red Bull. So yeah, he's not had a podium yet for Williams. So as I say, the British Grand Prix would be an amazing place for him to do that. I want to just finish... No, I mean, correcting myself. I want to finish by talking about Isack Hadjar. We've talked a lot about his teammate Liam Lawson and how he's been underperforming. I mean, again, Liam Lawson, anonymous this weekend. Isack Hadjar in his rookie year, and a proper rookie year, not like a Liam Lawson, he's done a few races before. He had that moment in Australia where he didn't make the grid for the first race, which was hugely embarrassing, and people were sort of probably saying, is Isack Hadjar really the right choice? Since then, 11th in China, 8th here in Japan, 13th in Bahrain, 10th in Saudi Arabia, Miami 11th, and then 9th this past weekend. I mean, outperforming Liam Lawson to start with, but also very consistent, and you would imagine he's just going to get better and better.
Arguably outperforming Yuki Tsunoda in the Red Bull as well, which is interesting, isn't it? For that whole 3rd or 2nd driver in the Red Bull situation. I'm sure that's going to bubble on as the year goes on, especially if Yuki continues to struggle and Hadjar continues to excel, which he really is. He's been potentially one of the surprises of the year so far. Such consistent results, barring the first round, but that was quite literally a rookie error for a rookie in his first proper race weekend. So yeah, he's doing really, really well. I think he's also starting to settle into the role as a Formula One driver as well, maturing into that. He had pace early on, but made a couple of little errors in the races that cost him a couple of positions, or just, doesn't quite polish weekend that you see from a 2nd, 3rd, 4th experienced years driver. But then again, listening to his after race interview, Hadjar, he was saying that, 9th place is like, we really maximised the weekend. Tire degradation was about as good as we could have done. The safety cars were what they were. And he's talking like an experienced Formula One driver now. He knows where the opportunities are in the races. He knows what it takes, or it feels like he knows what it takes to do well over a race weekend now, not just banging a good lap in quali and then see how it goes in the race. Really impressive, and especially a good look when, his teammate who was promoted to Red Bull and has been demoted alongside him isn't performing at the same sort of level. And I do feel a little bit sorry for Lawson, because he was the man of the moment, and then now he's being outshone a little bit by his rookie teammate. I think Lawson hopefully finds his feet. I've said this a number of times. I think he can perform at that level or maybe even higher, but the momentum's not with him. And this weekend was one of those, again, just caught out by the safety car periods, but ultimately borne out of the fact that he didn't qualify as well as Hadjar. So, can't take anything away from Hadjar. He's doing a great job.
Wouldn't be surprised to see at the end of the year that Isack Hadjar is the most impressive, he's the most impressive rookie already, along maybe with Kimi Antonelli, but to be the most impressive of the non-Max Verstappen Red Bull family drivers at the end of this year. Anyway, we will look back at that in our end of year roundup, which is months away, but it'll come really, really quickly. What's coming up quickly is the second of the 3 in this kind of triple header races at Monaco this weekend. Very quickly before we wrap up, is Monaco still special, given that these cars can barely overtake now because they're so big?
It is special. I am firmly on the fence of Monaco should stay. It's hard to overtake, but it's a unique opportunity to race in such a tight circuit. It's a unique challenge for the drivers. We see year on year it throws up surprises with drivers being able to really show off their skill, outperform their car based on, expected performance. We see drivers make mistakes, which puts them out of the contention. And then the race, maybe not the most scintillating, but I think it still has its place.
maybe the Alpines will avoid each other this year, although you never know, because Franco Colapinto does like to find a little bit of crash damage. Anyway, we will react to that here on the On Track recap next week on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel, and of course on Track, our weekly motorsport show on talkSPORT 2. Piers, thank you very much for joining me. Best of luck this weekend. Are you commentating on Monaco?
No, I'm not. I'm a GB Force, Alton Park. So if you want to tune into that, find that on the MSV TV YouTube channel. That'll be on Saturday and Monday.
There we go. We flogged more than enough stuff. I'll just mention, of course, we were live from Formula E here in Japan this past weekend. You can check out more on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel.